You've probably played the telephone game where one person has a message and then they whisper it in the ear of someone else and they whisper in the ear of someone else and like you let it go all the way back around and hear how garbled it's become. It's a fun game, but it's a stupid analogy for how the Bible came about. So an objection that people have, and it's one that you definitely need to think about and talk through, the objection is, how do we know that the Bible as we have it now is actually what the apostles or the other authors intended? It's a valid question. It's an answer, or it's a thing that we need to answer. However, a lot of people propose the telephone game as, well, you can't trust what the Bible said. It got corrupted by either just transmission error or someone actively tampered it. Like they were trying, like Jesus never claimed to be God and they decided to change it later that he was, or, insert whatever heresy people want here. Which, if you notice, the true Jesus of a lot of these things is Jesus according to how that author wants. So like if that author was communist, then Jesus is a communist. If that author was, I don't know, fill in whatever else, like that's who the real Jesus was, not the Jesus as had been manipulated by transmission stuff. Slight tangent, but it's important to note. There are a lot of flaws with the telephone game analogy. I'm just going to highlight a few of them. One is, with the telephone game, you don't really care much about the message. It's kind of like a silly thing. It's not like you have to transmit this message around, otherwise, like, people die. Or, this is the nuclear launch code that's going to prevent World War III. You would be very careful to transmit that message correctly. You wouldn't just whisper it in their ear. You would like have them whisper it back to make sure they got it right. And like as you went around, you would do that because you cared so much about this thing. Well, I would argue that the gospel, especially for the apostles, is a bigger deal than the let's prevent World War III codes, because that's about temporal life and the gospel is about eternal life. So these are high stakes, big deal. We're going to make sure we get this message right. Which you can probably see in your own life as well. Like there's some stuff that just doesn't matter, you can't remember it, but you probably remember where you were when 9/11 happened. You probably remember the details of that. That planes flew into those towers, the towers came down. Like no one is really in error on what happened then. Even if they weren't there, even if they just heard it from other people, you still got the main facts of the event right. Another major flaw is incidental memories versus rehearsed memory. So what does that mean? Incidental memory is something that you just remember, whereas rehearsed is I'm telling people about it. So if you're teaching a class, if you're telling a story about something that happened in your life, you're going to be very precise with that thing because you've talked about it a lot. Like let's say you're a speaker, like that's your profession. You can probably give the major talks that you know, like right now, you could just do it. So if you're speaking about this surgery that you did and it was, groundbreaking research, you're going to remember that really well. Whereas what you had for breakfast 3 weeks ago, you're probably not going to remember that super well. Unless you're like me and you have the same thing for breakfast every day, in which case it's very easy to remember what you had. The rehearsed memory thing is a better example for the apostles because they preached about Jesus, which is what the Gospels and Paul's letters and stuff are about. So since they're preaching about this thing, they're going to remember it a lot better. Now, those two do not fully answer the question of, can we consider the gospel accounts reliable? I'm not getting into that into this video. I just want to say, telephone analogy is not a good analogy, so don't use it as an example. And if someone uses it as an example, you can show, here's why it's very flawed and doesn't apply to the gospel. Because heroes know their stuff, and they can explain it. Maybe not perfectly, maybe they have to look things up later, but they can. So, be a hero today.